Ton Rabbanon ein madlikin betevel tomei bechol vein sarachlem b'Shabbos. It's also to use tevel, which is tomei, to use it as fuel, even bechol, even on a weekday. Certainly on Shabbos you can't use it. Tevel is the produce that the hafrosh of the Trumas and Maaseh has not taken place yet. That's tevel. Tevel tomei cannot be used even on a weekday. As the Gemara will state shortly, we'll see in the Gemara that there's an isser to burn tevel. So you can't use it on a weekday, certainly not on Shabbos. And Rashi says it applies to tevel which is tomei, kol shekain it applies to tevel which is tohar. That certainly cannot be burned. Taisus agrees that tevel tohar cannot be burned, but he says it's not a kol shekain. He says it similarly cannot be used, but both agree that it applies not only to tevel which is tomei, but tevel which is tohar. It cannot be burned. You cannot use it for fuel on a weekday, and certainly not on Shabbos. Ki yaitzaboy ein madlikin b'neft lavan b'chol. In a similar manner, you cannot use neft, lavan, white naphtha. You cannot use it on the weekday, vein sarach lemer b'Shabbos, and certainly not on Shabbos. So we know by neft that the issue on neft is that b'chol, that you cannot be used because there is a sakana involved with it, because the flame shoots up, and it's a sakana, so you cannot use it on the weekday. You can't use it on Shabbos because it has a bad odor, and people will leave, and they'll leave the room, and it's not covered in 90 Shabbos. So bishlam and neft lavan b'nei shuaf, it shoots up, and it's a sakana. So therefore we understand that that is why it's also on the weekday. And it's also on Shabbos because it has a bad odor and people will leave the room. How about tevel tomei my time? But what is the reason for tevel tomei? What is involved? Why can you not use it on the weekday? So the Gemara will give the source. Shortly we'll see what the source is, why it cannot be used on the weekday. And there's a discussion on the Forshim, and when we say neft lovan, is it specifically neft lovan, or does it mean any neft? Now we saw previously in the Mishnah that the Mishnah on Daf Chav Dalam and Beis says Chachamim matirim b'chol shmanim. It says bitrin b'neft. The Chachamim are matir b'neft. So then the question arises is over here when it says, when we say that you're not madlik b'itron b'neft lovan, doesn't mean all neft, even stam neft, and the Tana the Brisa argues on the Chachamim in the Mishnah, and it's a machlokes. Or when we say neft lavan over here, it means specifically neft lavan, meaning that the Tana the Brisa agrees that the Tana of the Mishnah of Chavdal Mebeis, the Chachamim, he agrees that stam neft, that neft would be mutter, and this is only specifically neft lavan. So that's a discussion amongst the Meforshim, the Bar Tanura, Rabbi Kiveger, if this is a machlekes between the Tana of the Mishnah, or is this specific to neft lovan? Now, on another note, we understand over here why we're saying you can't use it on the weekday, and certainly you cannot use it on Shabbos. So there's two separate reasons. There's a reason on the weekday. There's one reason, it's sakana. On Shabbos, in addition to that reason, you have an additional reason in that it's not covered as Shabbos, it has a bad odor, and we're afraid people will leave the room and it's not covered on 90 Shabbos. However, when the Brisa starts off, Ein madlikim betevel tomei b'chol, vein sarach lemer b'Shabbos, what is the vein sarach lemer b'Shabbos? What does it mean? And certainly cannot use it on Shabbos. When tevel tomei, what is the additional reason that you cannot use it on Shabbos? We understand that by the neft there's an additional reason, and it's ein sarach lemer. But legabe the tevel tomei, what is the additional reason for that would apply to Shabbos? Perhaps, however, we could say is that it's also on the weekday, because as we'll see in the Gemara shortly, there's an isser to burn tevel. Now on Shabbos, perhaps the pshat is, in addition to that, certainly it's also, ein tzarich loimer, certainly it's also on Shabbos, because if there is an isser, a person might realize there's an isser, and now remove it because he doesn't want to be over the isser, and therefore come to be over on mechaber by removing the oil. So it's also on the weekday. It's certainly also on Shabbos, because on Shabbos a person might realize that he's doing something wrong and now try to remove the oil, and he'll be over on Mechaba, the Isser of Shabbos. I'll go upon what is the Isser of burning Tevel? What is the Isser of burning Tevel? My time is Okta Gemara Makro. It says it B'Loshen Rabbim, True Mois in the plural. B'Shtei Trumas like also Medaber. It's talking about two Trumas. Achas Truma Tahira, Achas Truma Tamei. And it equates the two. You have to guard. You have to safeguard Truma Tahira and Truma Tamei. Now, Ma Truma Tahira en l'chabo el mishas haroma ve'elach. Truma Tahira. When are you allowed to partake? And the kohen is allowed to eat it when it's after it's tevel. It's also to everybody. When is the kohen allowed to have the truma? Once it's removed, you had a hafrosha, haroma. It's removed. The truma is separated from the rest of the produce. That's given to the kohen. Then he's allowed to eat it. So we're equating the two trumas. The truma tahira tameya, just like tahira, it's only after the hafrosha. El mishas hafrosha ve'elach av truma tameya in the chabur el mishas harama ve'elach. So therefore, similarly, truma tameya, you can benefit from it by using it for fuel, for burning it, but it's also only after harama, not in the tevel state, but only after it's been removed and it's truma. When it becomes tomei, then it can be burned. Gufer of Shimon Elazar Aimer in Madlikim Tsari. He says you cannot use balsam oil. V'chein ha'yer of Shimon ben Elazar Aimer Tsari ein oil esraf me'asei ketaf. He says that the tsari, this oil, the balsam oil, comes as a sap from the asei ketaf, and therefore it cannot be used for fuel. It does not burn properly, and it cannot be used for the fuel because it comes from the sap. Rabbi Shemal Omer Kola Yotzmin Hates and Madlikim Boy. He says whatever comes from the tree you cannot use for fuel. You can't use anything that comes from the tree. You can't use for fuel. That's what Rabbi Shemal says. So Taisus asks that in the Mishnah coming up, we have the Tana says that Kola Yotzmin Hates ain't Madlikim Boy except for Pishtan, except for flax, which flax does come from the tree, and you could use it. Now over here, we don't say, it doesn't say chutz mi pishtan. What's the difference? Why not? Later on it says chutz mi pishtan, and here it doesn't say chutz mi pishtan. So Taisus answers because there's a difference. Because we're talking over here, we're talking about the fuel. Over there, it's talking about the wicks. So there's a difference between the wicks and the fuel. Over there, we're saying that you cannot use anything for the wicks, from a tree. You cannot use for wicks, except for pishna, except for flax. Over here, we're talking about for the fuel, so we don't make this exception, and flax is not usable for fuel. So therefore, it doesn't say chutz min pishna. Tosfos asks further that Rav Shmuel says in the Mishnah that you can't use itron because of Kavod Shabbos, because itron has a foul odor, and therefore itron cannot be used because it has a foul odor. A person might leave the room because of the odor. Now it's mashma that it's because of this gzer he might leave the room, but otherwise it would be suitable. Now over here we're saying that a yaitza mina eitz is not suitable because it does not draw properly, and the flame does not burn properly. And so it's mashma that me'ikar din, it's not a suitable substance for fuel because it does not draw, the flame does not draw from the oil properly, it doesn't burn properly, it flickers. Now why over there it has to give another reason because of kavod, because of the odor, where it seems to be that itran, he's saying, is yaitza min eitz. Itran is yaitza min eitz, and it's yaitza min eitz, it should be disqualified automatically without a secondary reason, a separate reason because of the odor. It's disqualified like all fuels that are yaitza min eitz. So why is it over there that we have to give this secondary reason? It should be disqualified primarily like all fuels that are yaitza min eitz, which are disqualified. And Tosfos doesn't give an answer to that. So it's not clear why it has to be given another reason because Gazrin and Shemi Yerchen v'Yetze. We're afraid that he might leave. But perhaps the reason is that maybe we can answer and say that there's a secondary reason that it could be applicable. Because Let's say, for instance, that a person uses the oil that's not really suitable because it doesn't draw properly. And there's a gzera that he might come to adjust it, he might come to be mate. Perhaps we could say that in a case, however, where there is a shomer, where a person has a shomer, or perhaps when he has a case where it's very high up, where we saw earlier that if the flame is very high up, we're not concerned shemiyate. So perhaps in a case where the flame is beyond his reach, where he can't adjust it, but nevertheless, because of the odor, it still would not be suitable, because the person might leave the room, and because of the odor, it's not covered Shabbos. So perhaps that's why this additional reason is given to cover those circumstances. So Rishmal Omer called Yotzim and Eitz and Madlikin by Rishmal Ben Baroik Omer and Madlikin al be Yotzim Apri. He says you can only use what is an extract of a pris. So what is he coming to add on over here? Meaning, so you can't use what is an extract from a tree, from sap. You can't use sap for fuels. Well, we know that already. What is he adding to what was said before? So what he's adding, Rashi says, is to exclude the shemen of dogim. The shemen is the shemen of dogim, which is not usable, even though it's over there. That as well, it's not a priest, so it's not suitable as well. Rabbi Tarfon Omer ein madlikin al b'shemen zayis bilvad. Rabbi Tarfon says you can only use olive oil. Omer Rav Yochanan ben Nur al Ragalav, he stood up and said, V'amar, what do you mean? How can you say that you can only use olive oil? V'amar ma yasu anshe bovel shein lam el shemen shom. What can they do? They only have sesame seed oil. What are they supposed to do? They don't have olive oil. They only have oil that comes from nuts. They only have oil from radishes. They only have neft. Therefore, you cannot add on to what the Chachamim said. They listed certain items that in Malikim, and we cannot add on to that and say additional items are also. Umadlikim is shemen dogim, and therefore he says you could use shemen dogim, ubi itron, and you could use itron. Rav Shimon Shazuri Omer madlikim is shemen pakuyas ubi neft. He says it's mutter to use shemen from gourds, from melons, and from neft. Simchas Omer kol hayotzim min habasar ein madlikim bay. He says you cannot be madlik anything that's yotzim min habasar. Ella shemen dogim. You can only use shemen dogim. You can only use shemen dogim. So, frag the Gemara Sumchas Hainu Tanakama. Well, Sumcha says anything that's yotzim min habasar you can't use, which is except for shemen dogim. Meaning, what's yotzim min habasar that you can't use? Means chaylev. In fact, the chaylev cannot be used. The only thing that's yotzim from the meat that can be used is shemen of the dogim, the fish. Meaning, implying that chaylev cannot be used. So Sumchas Hainu Tanakama. Well, Tanakama says that we only have what the Chacham said. What the Chacham answered, that is aser. You can't add on to it. Now, but the Chacham did say in the first Mishnah in the parak, what we did say, the Chacham say that you cannot use chaylev. So isn't that the same thing? Isn't the previous Tana said that you can't use chaylev, but you could use shemen dogim? Here also, Simcha says you can only yotzim min habasar you can't use, which means chaylev you can't use, except you can use fish oil. Hainu Tanakama, isn't that the same thing as Tanakama? More answers, he could be naya to Rabruna Marav. The chiluk is what Rabruna Rav said, that if you add on a little bit of oil, it's mutter, but it's not clear who said what. Now, Rabruna Marav said that whether it's chaylev or whether it's the oil from fish, if you add in a little bit of kosher oil, it will be kosher. He said adding in a little to both that it's kosher. However, the way Rashi explains it is that over here, Sumchas and both the Sumchas and the Tanakama, neither of them can hold completely like them, because they're both differentiating between chaylev and between fish oil. So neither of them can hold completely like what Rabrona said, that in both cases, if you add in some kosher oil, it's kosher, because they differentiate between the two. So therefore, one will hold that if you add in some oil to the fish oil, it's kosher. And one will hold that if you add in oil to the chalev, it's kosher. One will hold that fish oil doesn't need an additive. Chalev, if you add in oil, it will be kosher with that additive. The other one would hold that even fish oil needs an additive of kosher oil. Chalev, even if you add on a little bit of oil, is not kosher. But it's not clear which one will hold what. Neither of them can hold complete like Lebronim or Rabbah says. In both cases, if you add on kosher oil, it's kosher. Neither can hold that both are. They differentiate between the two. One will hold that fish oil is kosher without an additive. Chalev is kosher with an additive. The other one will hold, no, even fish oil is only kosher with an additive. Chalev, even with an additive, is not kosher. Dav Chof Vav Amud Aleph, 7 lines from the top, the 2 dots. Continuing on, the Gemara had discussion of the balsam oil, a further discussion about that type of oil. Umidal Saaretz Hishir Nevuzaradan Rav Tabachim Lekarmel Yagmim. So the pasuk says that after the Churban Bayis Rishon, that Nebuchadnezzar exiled the Klal Yisrael, exiled the people. They took away the Chachamim, they took away the prominent people. And all that was left was Nebuzaradan left in the land. He left the general of Nebuchadnezzar. He left the poor people, literally would mean the Karmim L'Yagmim, the people who were the gatherer of the grapes and who pressed the grapes in the presses. But the Gemara darshins, Karmim, Tanur of Yosef El Malak Farsaman. No, it means something different. It means Karmim, the gatherers, and the gatherers of the Farsaman. Mein Gedi Va'ad Ramasa. They were the ones who gathered the Farsaman, Malaktim Farsaman, Mein Gedi Va'ad Ramasa, and Yagvim Elotzai Chalazan, and those who caught the Chalazan fish, Misuma Shel Tzur Va'ad Haifa. So actually, they were special laborers. They weren't common people, like common laborers. They left the ones, the way the Chassam Sefer explains it, they were the ones that were needed. So the Gemara darshans it in this manner, because if it's Pshuta Shel Mikra, then why Dafka leave the ones to gather the grapes and the presses they could use from other countries and other places to do that? They left these people that had the special skill, that they were able to gather the balsam oil, which needed a special skill, and that was only found in Eretz Yisrael, and the ones who were able to catch the chalazon and the presses, and as opposed to the wine presses pressing the grapes for the wine, means it, and pressed it to press out the blood, the special blood of the chalazon that was used for dyes, for the tchelas, for the dye. So just another inyan that we're discussing, legabe, the balsam oil.